Thank you so much, Tseho. Food, fuel, transportation and other necessities have all seen price increases since the COVID epidemic and pandemic in the Ukraine, as well as the Ukraine crisis. Now, Morocco has experienced a steady decline in public services such as education and healthcare, as well as an increase in the gap between social classes, unemployment, wealth distribution and corruption. To commemorate Workers' Day, unions are pushing for more retirement funds, salary increases, and a reduction in the 38% income tax. To join us to discuss this further is Mosa'ab Elshamy, who is a journalist based in Morocco. A very good morning to Mosa'ab. A pleasure talking to you this morning. It's been quite a... we've seen an increase of protests happening in Morocco. Talk to me about the latest bout of protests that are slated for the next coming days and weeks.
Good morning, and thanks for having me. Can you hear me well?
I can, thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, as you have mentioned, Morocco has been following the pandemic. There has been huge rise in price hikes, and the country is still reeling from the after effects of the loss of many jobs, as well as the rise in prices that was especially clear following the Ukraine war, which only helped to exasperate the situation. Well, usually this day is commemorated in Morocco with significant protests that are staged by the workers' unions in Morocco and the different syndicates that represent different sectors of the working class. However, due to it being the last day in the holy month of Ramadan, we expect it to be a little more subdued this year than other years. But the social issues have still been very prominent. There have been steady protests, as you have mentioned, in the last few months since the start of the year, especially with the increase in fuel prices affecting perhaps every kind of commodity and affecting all classes in Morocco. This has caused a huge tension that has been raised to the highest levels. Only yesterday, the Prime Minister, Aziz Akhnouch, who, well, is one of the richest men in Africa, signed a deal with the Workers' Union, which was established in Morocco in the 1950s and represents more than 300,000 Moroccans, as well as other representatives, to alleviate some of these demands and try to unlock some of this tension that has manifested itself in the streets. So there has been a 10% increase in the minimum wage, which has been raised to close to 3,500 dirhams, so around $350. Some of the demands that the Workers' Union have presented have been met. However, it remains to be seen whether this will actually cause a reduction in the current stress that all Moroccan workers and classes are feeling following the month of Ramadan, where we expect there perhaps to be a summer of protest and tension, as both the pandemic and the Ukraine war, in addition to what Workers' Union claim as the policies by the Moroccan government, that has only caused more suffering and a large a widening perhaps of the social gaps.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that 3,500 dirhams that has been slated for the wage increase, the minimum wage rather, the start of the minimum wage. But I believe the unions requested 4,000, so that's 500 short. Talk to me about some of the other requests and changes that the workers' unions are asking for that the government have met, and those that they haven't, especially the glaring ones.
Yes, as you mentioned, the main demand has been to increase it by up to 4,000 dirham. That has not been met. However, the government says that this is going to be one of many other meetings. They are trying. The meeting was rushed in order to achieve some sort of concession before May Day to, as I mentioned, try and reduce the current stand lock that has been present even with previous governments. Other demands have been including the same increase in the private sector. There have been other demands such as reducing the income tax and also making it easy for workers to be promoted in their jobs. These have not been met. There have been other additions such as a parental leave, which is quite progressive for workers, a 15-day paid leave, but there has been no effect on the retirement fund request. There have been no changes on the progression in the promotion for workers. So, as I said, we don't think this will end the current issue, because I think this goes beyond just an increase in wages. This has been a long policy of privatization, of policies that have impacted the the public sector in Morocco, which is quite huge, and that has also affected education and the health sectors, which are both heavily underfunded, and we see lots of strikes regularly by doctors and teachers due to the poor conditions that sometimes they have to deal with in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned private doctors, teachers going on strikes, transport operators as well. But as you then say that the government has played ball to a certain extent, what do you make of a government's appetite to meet these demands and to effect change in terms of policy in particular, with that watershed paternity leave a law that's now been signed, in the bill of law that's been signed, increasing it from 3 days to 15, which is quite substantial. What do you make of the government's appetite to effect that change?
Well, this government came with huge expectations. As I mentioned, it is led by one of the richest men in Morocco. It came after 5 years of the previous government, which was led by Islamists, and that was heavily criticized for lifting subsidies on fuel and reducing the retirement funds and undoing a lot of the progress that was enacted in Morocco after 2011, especially, and the protests that happened following the Arab Spring protests in different parts of the Middle East and North Africa. There remains to be a lot of skepticism towards, especially Mr. Akhnouch, and the fact that one of Morocco's richest men is also the leader of the government. However, this was perhaps a lot of wishful hopes and thinking that this would help speed up the process of recovery from the COVID pandemic, and which is why he won the election and was quite a favorite from the beginning. What does this tell about the appetite? I think it tells more about the current pressure that is on the government that has been almost a year now in office with huge protests that have been against Mr. Akhnouch personally, but also against his government, that is seen as rich autocrats and not necessarily as politicians. And maybe this is a step to reduce these tensions and to try and deal with a slowing economy, which Mr. Akhnouch has said has been reduced. The forecast has been reduced from about 3.2% to 1%, and also to perhaps show some accomplishment on his government's rapport a year in.
Yeah, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. That is Mosa'ab Elshamy. He's in Morocco, in Rabat, a journalist there, just making sense of those strikes that is happening in the country, those protests. Right.